Admiral Cathor of the Centauran Defense Fleet stood motionless on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dawn, as his second-in-command delivered the news he had been dreading. The holographic display before him showed thousands of civilian vessels huddled around Haven's Hope, the frontier colony they had sworn to protect. Each light represented families, children, the elderly, refugees who had trusted in the Centauran military's promise of safety. The High Council's orders are absolute, Admiral. Commander Vextal's voice wavered slightly. We are to withdraw immediately. The swarm approaches, and they say we cannot risk our fleet in a battle we cannot win. Thor's crystalline eyes narrowed, their usual azure glow darkening to a deep indigo. In his 3 centuries of service, he had never questioned the Council's wisdom. But this was different. And what of our oath to Haven's Hope? Thor's voice remained steady, though his inner hearts ached. There are 2 million civilians down there, Commander. 2 million who came here because we promised them protection. The bridge fell silent. Every officer present knew what was at stake. The swarm, a hive-mind species that consumed everything in its path, had emerged from deep space 6 cycles ago. Their bioorganic ships numbered in the thousands, and they had already devoured 3 outer colonies. Sir, Vextal stepped closer, lowering his voice. The Council believes Haven's Hope is already lost. They say we must preserve our strength for defending the core worlds. Thor turned to face his crew, his tall, elegant frame casting a long shadow across the command deck. The Centaurans were known throughout the galaxy for their honor, their unwavering dedication to duty. Yet here they were, being ordered to abandon those who needed them most. Send a message to the High Council. Thor's voice carried across the bridge. Tell them Admiral Thor respectfully declines their order to withdraw. The Eternal Dawn and her battle group will remain to defend Haven's Hope. Gasps echoed across the bridge. Defying the Council was unprecedented. It was more than career suicide. It was cultural heresy. Admiral, Vextal's face paled. That's treason. No, old friend. Thor placed a 4-fingered hand on his second shoulder. Abandoning those who trust in us. That would be the real treason. The next hours were a blur of activity. Most of Cathor's battle group, following the Council's orders, jumped to hyperspace, leaving only 3 ships behind. The Eternal Dawn and 2 destroyers crewed by officers whose sense of duty outweighed their fear of punishment. Thor used the time to prepare. He coordinated with the colony's defense forces, organized civilian evacuation protocols, and distributed his remaining ships to create a defensive screen around the settlement. If they were going to make a last stand, they would make it count. The swarm arrived at dawn. Their bioships darkened the sky, a writhing mass of organic technology that seemed to devour light itself. Thor watched from his command chair as the first wave approached, his tactical display showing odds that made his heart stink. But he had made his choice. All ships, battle stations, his voice carried across the command channel. Remember why we stand here today. Remember those we protect. For Haven's Hope. The battle that followed would be remembered in whispered tales across 100 worlds. Thor's small fleet fought with desperate valor, using the colony's defense platforms and their own ships to create killing zones that took a terrible toll on the swarm. The Admiral's tactical genius showed in every maneuver, every calculated sacrifice. But numbers told in the end. One by one. Thor's ships fell. The Eternal Dawn's shields failed, her proud hull torn open by bioorganic weapons. As emergency systems blared and smoke filled the bridge, Thor ordered his crew to abandon ship. Sir, Vextal, bleeding from a head wound, refused to leave his post. You must come with us. Thor shook his head, his hands dancing across the tactical controls. Someone must coordinate the final civilian evacuations. Someone must buy them time. He looked up at his old friend. Go, Vextal. Tell them what happened here. Tell them we kept our word. The evacuation pods launched, carrying the last of his crew to safety. Thor stood alone on his burning bridge, watching as the civilian ships made their desperate run for hyperspace. The swarm pressed in, their ships surrounding the eternal dawn like hungry predators. With his last remaining power, Cathor broadcast on all frequencies. "This is Admiral Cathor of Haven's Hope. We stand against the darkness. We keep our promises. We do not abandon our own." The Eternal Dawn's engines went critical, the explosion taking out dozens of swarm ships and creating a gap that allowed the last civilian vessels to escape. But Cathor's sacrifice came too late for himself. His escape pod, damaged in the battle, crashed on Haven's Hope's surface. As he lay in the wreckage, watching the swarm ships begin their systematic destruction of the colony, Cathor received one final message. The High Council, in their infinite wisdom, had declared him a traitor to the Centauran people. His name would be struck from the records, his family stripped of rank and privilege. Thor closed his eyes, feeling the weight of centuries of tradition and duty. He had lost everything: his command, his honor, his future. But as he listened to the distant sound of civilian ships jumping to safety, carrying thousands of lives he had helped save, he felt something else: peace. He had kept his word. He had stood his ground. And in doing so, he had proved that some things mattered more than blind obedience, even if it cost him everything. As consciousness faded, Thor wondered if anyone would remember the truth of what happened at Haven's Hope. Would anyone understand why a decorated admiral chose to throw away everything for a lonely colony on the edge of space? Little did he know, his story was about to reach ears he never expected, and his act of defiance would spark changes that would reshape the galaxy's understanding of honor, duty, and the true meaning of civilization. Captain Sarah Chen of the Earth vessel Horizon Seeker didn't expect to find anything valuable on Haven's Hope. The colony world had been declared a restricted zone after the swarm's attack, its surface marked as contaminated and dangerous. But her ship's unusual sensor readings had demanded investigation, even if it meant bending a few regulations. Another suite complete, Captain. Lieutenant Rodriguez reported from his station. "We're picking up an unusual energy signature. It's faint, but it doesn't match known swarm technology." Sarah leaned forward in her chair, studying the holographic display. The Horizon Seeker was a research vessel, not a warship, but its sensors were among the most sophisticated in the Earth fleet. What they were detecting shouldn't have been possible, not after 3 months of swarm occupation. "Location?" she asked, already reaching for her environmental suit. 2 kilometers east of the colony's central district," Rodriguez replied. It's moving, Captain. Barely, but definitely moving." Sarah made her decision. Humanity was still new to the galactic stage, often dismissed by the older races as primitive and reckless. But they had earned their place among the stars through curiosity and courage, 2 traits she'd inherited in abundance. "Prep the shuttle," she ordered. "Dr. Wells, grab your medical kit. Rodriguez, you're with us. Everyone else, maintain orbit and stay alert. If you detect any swarm activity, jump immediately. Don't wait for us." The descent to Haven's Hope's surface was tense. The planet's atmosphere, once carefully terraformed for the colony, had been tainted by swarm bioweapons. Dark clouds swirled around their shuttle, and the landscape below was a wasteland of destroyed buildings and bizarre organic growths. They landed near the energy signature, weapons ready. Sarah had read the reports about Haven's Hope, about the brave last stand of its defenders. The official story claimed everyone had died in the battle, but something about that narrative had never sat right with her. "Movement ahead," Rodriguez whispered, his scanner pointing toward a half-collapsed structure. "Whatever it is, it's big." They approached cautiously, their boots crunching on crystalline fragments that might once have been roads. The building appeared to be some kind of command center, its architecture distinctively Centauran. Most of the structure had been consumed by swarm growth, but one section remained relatively intact. The energy signature led them to a sealed doorway. Rodriguez worked on the controls while Dr. Wells analyzed the air quality. Sarah kept watch, her mind racing. The Centaurans were legendary warriors, known for their advanced technology and strict code of honor. But they had withdrawn from this sector of space after the swarm attacks, their once mighty presence reduced to occasional diplomatic missions. "Got it," Rodriguez announced as the door slid open with a hiss. The beam of Sarah's light revealed a scene that made her breath catch. The room was an emergency bunker, its walls lined with defunct Centauran technology. And there, amid the ruins, lay a figure she recognized from her xenopolitical studies, a Centauran officer, his once pristine uniform now tattered and stained. "Life signs are stable but weak," Dr. Wells reported, already moving forward with her medical scanner. "It's remarkable. He appears to be in some kind of suspended animation. Centauran physiology is incredibly resilient." Sarah approached the fallen officer, noting the elaborate insignia on his collar. Even in this state, there was something regal about him, something that commanded respect. Then she saw the name inscribed on his uniform, Admiral Cathor. "That's impossible," Rodriguez breathed. Admiral Cathor was declared a traitor. The Centauran High Council ordered that no one was to assist him under penalty of immediate sanctions. Sarah remembered the controversy. It had been all over the Galactic news. A decorated Centauran admiral who had defied orders, choosing to defend a doomed colony rather than retreat. The official stance was that he had died a traitor's death, his actions bringing shame to his people. But here he was, alive against all odds. "Captain," Dr. Wells looked up from her scanner, her expression grave. "We can save him, but we need to act fast. His suspension field is failing." Sarah knew the implications of what they were considering. Helping Cathor would be seen as a direct challenge to Centauran authority. Earth, still building its diplomatic relations with the older races, had been explicitly warned not to interfere in this matter. But as she looked at the fallen admiral, she remembered something her grandfather used to say. "The measure of a civilization isn't in its achievements, but in its compassion." "Get him to the shuttle," she ordered. "Full medical protocols. Rodriguez, grab any data cores you can salvage. The Admiral deserves a chance to tell his side of the story." As they carefully moved Cathor to their vessel, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to spark something bigger than themselves. The Centaurans valued honor above all else, but perhaps they had forgotten what honor truly meant. The shuttle lifted off just as new storm clouds gathered overhead. Sarah watched the ruins of Haven's Hope disappear beneath them, thinking about the choices that had led them here. Her crew had just risked their careers, possibly even Earth's diplomatic standing, to save one alien officer who had chosen principle over protocol. But as they docked with the Horizon Seeker, she knew they had made the right choice. Humanity might be young in galactic terms, but they understood something the older races sometimes forgot. True civilization meant standing up for what was right, even when, especially when, it was difficult. "Set course for the Jakarta station," she ordered as they secured Cathor in their medical bay. "And send an encrypted message to command. Tell them." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Tell them we found a survivor who needs asylum, and tell them to prepare for some very angry Centaurans." As the Horizon Seeker jumped to faster-than-light speed, Sarah stood watching the medical team work on their unexpected passenger. Whatever came next, they had chosen their path. Like Cathor himself, they had chosen to stand for something greater than rules and regulations. The real challenge was just beginning. Jakarta Station hung like a jeweled spindle against the backdrop of Earth's orbital defense network. As the Horizon Seeker approached, Captain Sarah Chen couldn't help but notice the unusual number of ships in the vicinity, including 3 Centauran cruisers that definitely shouldn't have been there. "They're hailing us," Rodriguez reported, his voice tight. "It's the Centauran flagship." Before Sarah could respond, Admiral Cathor spoke from behind her. He had regained consciousness during their journey, his crystalline eyes now sharp and alert, despite his weakened state. "They're not here for diplomacy, Captain. The High Council doesn't negotiate with traitors, or those who aid them." Sarah had spent the journey learning the full story from Cathor. The truth was far worse than anyone had suspected. The order to abandon Haven's Hope hadn't just been about military strategy. It had been part of a deeper conspiracy within the Centauran leadership. "Put them through," Sarah ordered, straightening in her chair. The holographic display flickered to life, revealing the stern face of Centauran High Commander Zaxtil. "Captain Chen," the commander's voice was ice. "You are harboring a condemned traitor. Surrender Admiral Thor immediately, or face the consequences of defying Centauran law." Sarah felt every eye on the bridge turn to her. This was the moment that would define not just their fate, but potentially the relationship between humanity and one of the galaxy's most powerful civilizations. "High Commander," she replied, keeping her voice steady. "We found Admiral Thor badly wounded but alive. Under interstellar humanitarian laws, we were obligated to render aid. We request a formal hearing to—" "Your species' laws mean nothing here," Zaxtil interrupted. "The Admiral's crimes are beyond your understanding. This is your final warning." Thor stepped forward, entering the projection field. "Still hiding behind protocol, Zaxtil. Tell them the truth about Haven's Hope. Tell them why the Council really wanted those civilians abandoned." The commander's face flickered with something. "Fear. You dare." "The swarm attack wasn't random," Thor continued, his voice carrying across the bridge. "Haven's Hope was conducting research into swarm communication patterns. They were close to a breakthrough, a way to potentially communicate with the hive mind, but certain elements in the High Council didn't want that. War is profitable for those who supply the weapons, isn't it, Commander?" Sarah's tactical officer suddenly spoke up. "Captain, the Centauran ships are powering weapons." "Broadcast on all frequencies," Sarah ordered, "and send the data package." Thor looked at her in surprise as screens around the bridge lit up with recovered data from Haven's Hope. During their journey, Rodriguez had managed to decrypt the colony's research logs. They showed everything: the breakthrough discoveries, the classified council communications, the hidden money trails. "We found more than just the Admiral in those ruins," Sarah announced to the now silent commander. "We found the truth. And right now, this feed is being transmitted to every major news outlet in Earth space. How long before it reaches the Centauran public?" The commander's image sputtered with rage. "You primitives dare to threaten us. We could destroy your station before your defenses even—" "Could you?" Thor interrupted. "Look around you, Commander. Count the ships." Sarah allowed herself a small smile as the commander finally noticed what she had seen earlier. Dozens of ships had quietly moved into position around Jakarta Station, not just Earth vessels, but ships from other races. Many were refugee vessels saved from Haven's Hope, their captains still loyal to the Admiral who had sacrificed everything to protect them. "The thing about humans," Sarah said quietly, "is that we believe in giving people a chance to tell their stories, and it seems quite a few others wanted to hear the Admiral's tale." The standoff lasted for several tense minutes. Sarah could see the calculations running behind the commander's eyes. The political cost of attacking an Earth station versus the risk of letting the truth emerge. Finally, the commander spoke, his voice tight. "This isn't over." The transmission cut off. Moments later, the Centauran ships began to withdraw. "That was too easy," Rodriguez muttered. "No," Thor said, leaning heavily against a console. "That was just the beginning. The Council won't let this go. They can't afford to. But you've given us something precious, Captain. You've given us time." Sarah nodded, already thinking ahead. The data they'd recovered didn't just expose the conspiracy. It contained the colony's research into swarm communication. If they could complete that work— "Admiral," she said, turning to Thor, "those civilian ships out there, they're loyal to you. And we have the research that could change everything. What would you say to finishing what Haven's Hope started?" Thor's crystalline eyes seemed to glow brighter. "You would risk even more for this cause, after everything it's already cost you." "That's the thing about humans, Admiral," Sarah replied with a slight smile. "We're really bad at giving up on what we believe in. And we believe in the truth. The Admiral was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the gathered ships, a fleet of outcasts and believers, drawn together by a shared commitment to justice. Then, he said finally, let us show the galaxy what honor truly means. As orders were relayed and ships began to form up around the Horizon Seeker, Sarah felt a familiar tension in her chest. They were about to challenge not just the Centauran High Council, but potentially the swarm itself. The odds were astronomical. But then, humans had never been very good at accepting impossible odds, and now they weren't alone. The research vessel Horizon Seeker hung at the edge of contested space, surrounded by its unlikely fleet of refugee ships and sympathetic allies. In what had once been the ship's cargo hold, now converted into a makeshift laboratory, Captain Sarah Chen watched as Admiral Thor examined the holographic display of Haven's Hope's final research. It's remarkable, the Admiral said, his crystalline eyes reflecting the dancing data streams. They weren't just studying the swarm's communication patterns, they were on the verge of establishing actual contact. Dr. Wells, who had been working nonstop to understand the colony's research, nodded. The swarm operates on quantum-entangled frequencies. That's why traditional communication attempts failed. But Haven's Hope developed a way to mimic their neural patterns. They just never got the chance to test it, because the Council made sure they wouldn't. Thor's voice was heavy with regret. How many lives could have been saved if we'd known this sooner? Sarah studied the faces around her. Human scientists working alongside refugee Centauran researchers, united by a common purpose. In the weeks since their confrontation at Jakarta Station, their unlikely coalition had grown. More ships had joined them, bringing not just resources but hope. The prototype is ready, Rodriguez announced from his workstation. But we'll need to be close to a swarm hub to broadcast at sufficient strength. Which means going back to Haven's Hope. Sarah finished. The swarm has turned it into one of their primary nests in this sector. The room fell silent. Everyone knew what that meant. Haven's Hope wasn't just occupied by the swarm. It was also being watched by Centauran patrol ships, enforcing the quarantine zone while really making sure no one discovered more evidence of the Council's betrayal. We'll need a distraction, Thor said, straightening despite his still healing wounds. Something to draw away both the Centauran patrols and the swarm's outer defenses. Sarah smiled. Actually, Admiral, we have something better. She gestured to the holographic display, where a new set of ships appeared. Earth vessels, but unlike any Thor had seen before. Prototype stealth ships, she explained. They use metamaterial cloaking combined with quantum field manipulation. The Centaurans won't see us coming because they're looking for traditional engine signatures. And the swarm, she paused, looking at Dr. Wells. The swarm's biosensors work on principles similar to their communication, the doctor continued. If we can mask ourselves using the same quantum frequencies they use to communicate, we should be invisible to them too. Thor's eyes widened. Your people developed this technology just for this mission. Let's just say Earth's research and development teams got very interested in your story. Sarah replied. Sometimes the best way to honor someone's sacrifice is to make sure it wasn't in vain. The next hours were a blur of preparation. The stealth ships, there were 3 of them, would carry small teams to Haven's Hope's surface. Their mission was simple in theory, but nearly impossible in execution. Reach the colony's old research center, set up the quantum broadcaster, and attempt to communicate with the swarm before either they or the Centauran patrols discovered them. As Sarah suited up alongside her team, she caught Thor watching her with an unreadable expression. Something wrong, Admiral. You remind me of my people, Captain. Not as we are now, but as we once were, before protocol became more important than principle. He paused. The Council was right about one thing. Your species is dangerous, but not in the way they think. You're dangerous because you make others question their assumptions. Sarah checked her quantum rifle. Another new development from Earth's labs. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. The insertion went more smoothly than anyone had dared hope. The stealth technology worked perfectly, allowing them to slip past both center-end patrols and swarm biosentries. As they approached the surface, Sarah saw Haven's Hope for the first time since their rescue mission. The colony had been transformed. Swarm structures pulsed with bioluminescence, their organic architecture spreading like a living city across the landscape. It was beautiful in its alien way, but Sarah couldn't forget what it had cost to build it. They landed near the old research center, now half consumed by swarm growth. Teams moved quickly, setting up equipment while keeping watch for any sign they'd been detected. Dr. Wells worked with focused intensity, calibrating the quantum broadcaster. "Ready," she announced finally. "But Captain, we still don't know how the swarm will react. This could trigger an attack response." Sarah looked at Cathor, whom nodded grimly. They had come too far to turn back now. "Broadcast the signal," she ordered. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the swarm structures around them began to pulse with new patterns of light. The ground itself seemed to vibrate with unseen energy. "We're receiving a response," Dr. Wells reported, her voice tense with excitement. It's ordered, structured. This isn't just noise. They're actually communicating." Before anyone could celebrate, Rodriguez's voice cut through their comms. "Multiple contacts. Center-end warships dropping out of hyperspace. They must have detected the quantum signatures." Sarah's mind raced. They needed more time to establish proper communication, to prove that dialogue with the swarm was possible. But if the center-end ships opened fire, they'd trigger exactly the kind of swarm response the Council had been counting on to justify their actions. That's when she saw it. A change in the swarm's bioluminescent patterns. They weren't random anymore. They were responding to the threat, but not in the way anyone expected. "Dr. Wells," she called out. "What are they saying?" The doctor's hands flew over her console, translating the quantum signals. They're asking why. Why do we fight? Why do we destroy? They want to understand. Cathor stepped forward, his voice carrying across all channels, to his people's ships above, to the swarm around them, to everyone who could hear, because we never tried to listen, because we assumed war was the only possible response to difference, because we forgot that true strength lies not in destroying what we fear, but in seeking to understand it. The swarm's patterns shifted again, creating a display of light and energy that seemed to dance across the sky. And in that moment, as center-end ships hung motionless above, and humans stood among alien structures below, something changed in the galaxy's great dance of civilizations. It wasn't an ending, far from it. The Council's conspiracy still needed to be fully exposed, the swarm's intentions thoroughly understood. Trust carefully built between species that had only known fear of each other. But it was a beginning. And sometimes, Sarah thought as she watched humans and center-ends and swarm light patterns create something new together, that was enough. The grand assembly chamber of Earth's Unity Station hummed with tension. 3 months had passed since the events at Haven's Hope, and representatives from across the galaxy had gathered to witness something unprecedented. The first formal dialogue between center-ends, humans, and the swarm. Captain Sarah Chen stood at attention beside Admiral Cathor, watching as the swarm's representative entered the chamber. Unlike the biological weapons they had first encountered, this being had adapted itself for communication, its bioluminescent patterns shifting in complex ways that the quantum translators now understood as language. The Center and High Council members sat rigid in their seats, their faces masks of forced diplomacy. The public revelation of their conspiracy had forced significant changes in their governance, though many of the old guard still clung to power. "We gather here," Cathor began, his voice carrying across the chamber, "to acknowledge a truth that many of us forgot, that the greatest victories are not won through force of arms, but through force of understanding." Sarah watched the assembled delegates, remembering the battles, both physical and diplomatic, that had brought them to this moment. The swarm, they had discovered, was not the mindless consuming force everyone had assumed. It was a collective consciousness that had been trying to communicate for centuries, its attempts at contact misinterpreted as attacks. The swarm representative's patterns shifted, its translated words appearing on screens throughout the chamber. We sought connection. We found fear. Until humans showed another way. This brought murmurs from the assembled delegates. Humanity's role in these events had transformed their standing in the galactic community. Their willingness to look past established assumptions, to risk everything on the chance of understanding rather than conflict, had earned them both respect and concern from the older races. The humans' actions were reckless. One of the council members spoke up. They risked interstellar war by interfering in Centauran affairs. No, Thor countered, his crystalline eyes bright. They reminded us of what we once were. The Centauran people were explorers once, seekers of knowledge. We built our civilization on the principles of honor and understanding. But somewhere along the way, we confused rigid adherence to protocol with true honor. Sarah stepped forward, her voice clear. Earth has a long history of conflict, of fear leading to violence. But we also learned that our greatest achievements came when we dared to reach across those divisions, when we chose to listen instead of fear. The swarm's patterns danced with new complexity. We offer knowledge, exchange, growth. Our biological adaptations can heal worlds ravaged by war. Our collective consciousness can bridge gaps between disparate minds. We seek not to consume, but to connect. The chamber erupted in discussion. The implications were staggering. The swarm's biological technology, properly understood and adapted, could revolutionize everything from medicine to space travel. And the quantum communication methods developed at Haven's Hope could transform interstellar relations. Which brings us to our proposal, Sarah continued, nodding to Cthor. A joint initiative between Earth, the reformed Centauran government, and the swarm. A commitment to exploration and understanding, backed by the combined knowledge of all our peoples. Thor unveiled the holographic plans for what they called the Haven Project, a series of research stations dedicated to collaborative work between all species, protected by a joint fleet that would answer not to any single government, but to a council representing all participating races. My people, Thor addressed the Centauran delegates directly, speak often of honor. But true honor lies not in maintaining outdated traditions, but in having the courage to forge new paths when the old ones fail us. The humans showed us this. Now we have a chance to show the galaxy what we can achieve together. The swarm representative moved forward, its patterns creating a breathtaking display. We offer trust. Accept trust. Build future. As the assembly moved into detailed discussions, Sarah found herself standing by one of Unity Station's vast windows, looking out at the Earth below. Thor joined her, his reflection appearing beside hers in the transparent metal. Having doubts, Captain? Sarah shook her head. Just thinking about how far we've come. When we found you on Haven's Hope, I never imagined it would lead to this. Your people have a gift, Sarah Chen. You see possibilities where others see only threats. You question not because you lack respect for tradition, but because you respect truth more. We're not perfect, she reminded him. Earth has its own dark chapters, its own failures. Perhaps that's exactly why you succeeded where we failed. You know the cost of fear, of letting prejudice override wisdom. You've learned from your mistakes rather than denying them. The swarm representative approached them, its patterns creating a gentle aurora of colors. The translator rendered its message. New beginnings require courage. Humans show courage. Centaurans remember courage. Together, make new stories. Sarah smiled. The path ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be resistance, setbacks, moments when the old fears threatened to resurface. But they had proven that change was possible, that understanding could triumph over fear. You know, she said, looking at her unlikely companions, a disgraced alien admiral who had chosen conscience over duty, and a being that her people had once thought incapable of communication. Maybe that's the real lesson here. It's not just about humans, or Centaurans, or the swarm. It's about remembering that real strength comes from being willing to take that first step, to reach out across the void and hope someone reaches back. The three of them stood together, watching as Earth turned slowly below, its blue-white surface reflecting the light of distant stars. In that moment, they were more than representatives of their species. They were pioneers of a new way of thinking, proof that the galaxy's greatest adventures came not from conquering the unknown, but from daring to understand it. The Haven Project would go on to transform interstellar relations, but its greatest legacy wasn't in its scientific achievements or diplomatic breakthroughs. It was in the story it told, that in a universe vast and often frightening, the true measure of civilization lay not in its power to destroy, but in its courage to understand.